Hi everyone, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today on John's Briefs, Tim Forshee is back with us. We're glad to have him here.
Glad to be here.
We had an incident on the main channel of an Oakland liquor store manager who waved the cops down with a gun in his hand and got detained for an hour for it. I want to talk to the lawyer about it.
To win the fight after the fight, you need help. After a use of force, I trust Firearm's legal protection to help me win the fight for the rest of my life. From their 24/7 attorney-answered hotline to coverage for the use of all legal tools, Firearms Legal Protection has you covered. Get a discount by signing up at the link below.
So, I say all the time, don't chase deadly threats. Say that on the big channel a lot.
Yeah.
And in this case, I mean, I get it, right? So guys break into his store, 7 a.m. It's Oakland, California. Everybody's worried about crime.
Mm-hmm.
I totally get he's got a gun in his hands because who knows what those guys have capability. I love that he didn't shoot them. They ran off.
Thank goodness.
Good for all that. And then goes outside. And again, if you go read the news story, dudes were going to jump in their getaway car, but he points a gun at them, so they drop the keys and run off. Hey, free car.
We had extremely inept robbers.
Yes.
Who encountered this guy, yeah, thank goodness.
And then he stands there with a gun in his hand and people start calling 911 because there's a man standing outside with a gun in his hand. And then he sees a California Highway Patrol officer driving by in his car and waves at him with a gun. Officer, officer. And that officer then detains him. I think he's fairly lucky he didn't get shot.
I think he's incredibly lucky he didn't get shot, or at least shot at. And I think he should have stopped and bought a lottery ticket on his way home from the police department that day, yeah. For sure.
And okay, so again, from a practical perspective, waving the police down with a gun in your hand is among the dumbest things I've ever heard.
I mean, I always tell people, if you, God forbid you're at the scene of a shooting or at the scene of a near shooting, and the police show up and the police say drop the weapon and you say something like, oh, it's okay, I'm the homeowner. Oh, it's okay, I'm the shop owner. Oh, it's okay. You're going to get shot.
You're going to get shot.
I mean, I would have to say that the cop probably should have shot them. So it's like, if they don't, it's probably bad policing coupled with your luck that saved your life. You don't want to count on those things.
Yeah, and listen, this is one of the reasons. Now, I think probably in this case, this guy had a gun staged at the in his desk back in the back room where he was. But for us concealed carriers, this is why I say your holster needs to stay open. Right. So then that way, when the threat is gone, you put the gun away.
Yeah, and those, if you're going to have a $500 gun, a $900 gun, get something better than the $2 gun show, Uncle Mike's collapsible nylon piece of junk that's starting to rot from mildew. Because the minute you draw it, it clamps shut from your belt, and it's almost impossible to reholster. You're going to cover yourself as you do. You can get a good Kydex holster for $50 to $100. Yeah. Just invest. Yeah.
$50 to $100. We got a list on the website of holster makers we recommend. You don't got to spend thousands of dollars, but you should plan to spend somewhere $50 to $100 on a reasonable holster. Okay, fine. A couple of folks wondering though about him being detained because at some point the highway patrol officer switched him over and changed custody of him to Oakland PD.
Mm-hmm. That's a jurisdictional thing. That's probably appropriate.
So I'm thinking probably that this officer, he's highway patrolman. He's not, an Oakland cop.
Correct.
He just happened to be the first cop that showed up.
Right.
So okay, I'm going to handcuff you and put you in my car.
People don't realize, but the state troopers don't really make particularly many arrests per se. They're not really, unless they're the detectives, they're not really in the arrest business so much. So I'm not surprised at all that they pawn it back off to the municipal police department.
I've heard other police departments call the highway patrol AAA with a badge.
Well,
I think that's maybe a little far.
I didn't say that. For those of you troopers out there, God bless you and thank you for your assistance. But.
We love you, Stadies. Unless you're pulling us over for speeding. We don't like that, but we get it. But at the same time, is it legal for an officer to detain you like that?
Of course, absolutely. Anytime that the officer has, and people think that it requires probable cause, it doesn't. It requires reasonable suspicion. And a guy with a gun waving around in a municipality like that, you couldn't get more reasonable suspicion than that, and probably probable cause. So absolutely. And it was appropriate to detain him, and anybody watching this should understand that you are subject to detention. If your gun becomes involved, plan on getting arrested, plan on being handcuffed, plan on spending a couple minutes on the ground on your belly. It's not pleasant, there's nothing pleasant about it, but it's gonna happen, so plan for the worst and pray for the best, not the other way around. So. Yeah, that's just part of the course.
Now, okay, so we're assuming that people understand some terms here. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what is reasonable suspicion.
Well, inevitably, it's interpreted by a judge. Let's not forget. I can tell you my impressions of it, and it doesn't really mean a doggone thing unless the judge that's determining that agrees with me. So, But reasonable suspicion is something below, it's probably slightly above a 51% liability. It's right around, it's more likely than not, right? probable cause is something, again, in my mind, is probably more like 75, 80% likely. So if you smell marijuana smoke coming out of a door, when they roll the window down to give you their driver's license, you smell marijuana smoke. Well, 10 years ago, that was probable cause to take everybody out of the car, handcuff them, and search the car. It's not now because it could be medicinal marijuana in a state that doesn't yet have recreational. Arizona passed recreational. So in theory, unless you see that the kids are minors in there, that would not rise to the level of reasonable suspicion to even remove them from the car. So it's got to be with the current state of the law and the facts known to that officer at that time at that location. They've got to be able to have a reasonable suspicion that there's been some sort of a crime committed.
Yeah, and the way I kind of look at it as probable cause involves the word probably. So there's probably a crime that happened.
Yeah.
There's probably a crime.
Right. That's a good way of looking at it.
You know, I'm a trained person in the law, and there's probably criminal behavior there. Whereas a reasonable suspicion is, I stick my calibrated thumb out there, and I go, something ain't right.
It feels colder on one side of my thumb than the other.
Yeah.
There you go. Yep.
Something's not quite right, and I have that idea that the funny part is these kind of court cases in the old country are like, a reasonable officer believes that crime is afoot.
They had a great way of phrasing stuff back then.
Afoot.
Very Holmesian. Yeah, you got to love it. Yeah.
Right? And so, so an officer has reasonable suspicion that crime is afoot when somebody's waving a gun around.
Correct.
Now then,
I think that might even rise to the level of probable cause. I mean, it's not as though there's a legal reason that somebody's walking down the street in Oakland, California, waving a gun around.
Right.
There's no reasonable expectation that would occur in the regular course of business.
And I certainly think that you could say, hey, I'm like waving to you with the gun.
Yeah.
This is a reckless display of a firearm.
That's exactly right.
Probably there's a crime there. Now, would we expect once the facts are known, we have somebody in a high state of agitation, they're scared, they just had a major crime done to them. Would an officer maybe exercise their discretion and go, okay, we unloaded your gun, we put it back in your office, have a nice day, sir? Yes. And hopefully, of course, an overzealous prosecutor doesn't say, well, you extended the bounds and we're going to charge you with brandishing after this really terrible incident you were in.
And I think they did the right thing. I think that, I'm sure the guy got a talking to, and maybe he got a business card or so from a firearms instructor out, during the course of the process. But and I like what you said during the video, John, that you pointed out that he didn't have particularly great gun handling skills. Yeah, he had the hitchhiker thumb grip. But you didn't criticize him. I love that, because like you said, you don't have to be Rambo in order to have the right to defend yourself. But the thing I thought was interesting is, thank God he didn't have to shoot.
Yep.
But like you said, when it was all done, he needed to have the training, the knowledge, the ability to make that gun safe, to render that gun safe. If he had a holster, again, don't be in a real quick hurry to reholster your gun. You catch a shirt tail going in there, you forget your fingers in the trigger guard, and suddenly you're in the hospital yourself. So be wary of that. But once it's clear that the threat's over and you've got your respiration rate back down just a little bit, watch the gun into the holster and holster the gun. At that point, with your hands like this, nobody's going to think you're a threat, or not at least an immediate threat. So that would have been helpful. He didn't have a holster. Like you said, I think he probably had a stage in the back, so what do you do then? Maybe, I don't know, clear the weapon, lay the weapon down, and put your hands up. Direct the cop, get the cop's attention with your hands, with your bare hands without a gun in them. I'm not a big put the gun in your pocket or put the gun in your waistband. I think that's a recipe for disaster, but you don't want that gun in your hands when you're signaling to a police officer, that's for sure.
Especially under the effects of the cortisol dump, right? So remember, some people call it an adrenaline dump. The adrenaline goes away very quickly. That's your Superman serum. But then the cortisol sticks around, and that's what regulates your heartbeat and all these things. And all of a sudden,
makes your skin feel like there's mosquitoes under it.
All of a sudden, your heart rate's through the roof. You get the jangles, and you don't want to be trying to figure out where am I going to put a gun. Put it on the ground, or even better, stay in the space where you're at, where maybe you've got a table you can just put it down on. And I'm not even a big fan of clearing it at that point, because now I'm administratively handling a gun while I'm doing the shakies.
I got no problem with that either.
Put the gun down, or follow that safe holstering procedure that we talked about in other videos on the channel. And and then call, right? When you're the responder or the complainant on 911, right? Hey, these guys just did that rather than waving a cop down. So, I don't blame the officer for putting the guy in cuffs and detaining him
Not at all.
an hour.
That's standard operating procedure. I would have done it too. So yeah.
And I think there's some good advice here that even in a completely justified defensive use of force. Now, we've seen other cases where that hasn't been the case.
Sure.
That officers show up on scene, they get a good idea.
I've had cases where the officers have practically given my client a back rub. I mean, they've been so unbelievably wonderfully helpful, right? But you can't count on that. Like I said, you plan for the worst and pray for the best, not the other way around.
Boy, that took a turn. The officers came and gave me a back rub.
I mean, I've literally had officers give cards for counselors. I've literally had officers give hugs to my clients and stuff. I mean, so you hear the whole spectrum, right? But you better not count on that. You better not count on being the hero here. So
if you plan on the worst, that hey, they're going to show up, I'm going to end up on the ground in cuffs for an hour, of course, because I'm going to say, hey, officer, I'm not going to make a statement. I will speak to my counsel before I make any statements. I invoke my right to silence, which you should. Then that's what they're going to do until your lawyer shows up and gives them, the other side of the story.
And you may be in cuffs that entire time.
You may.
Right? And I don't know how many of you guys have been cuffed. I guess there's probably two different contexts there. We'll make sure we're talking about this context. It's not pleasant. There's nothing pleasant about it. It hurts. They're too tight. Well, by industry standards, they're not too tight. There's just nothing comfortable or pleasant about it.
They're supposed to be.
Yeah, so plan on it. It's not going to be a wonderful experience. But you know what? It'll make a great story next week at the cocktail party when you're relating this thing, as long as you handle it properly.
And quite frankly, if you ended up having to use your firearm to defend your life, it's the least important part of the worst day of your life.
Exactly.
But if you plan on that, good. Don't wave a gun around at cops.
That's great way to get caught.
Great way to get shot. If, God forbid, things go crazy sideways, you end up, with a prosecutor giving you a real hard look, which you didn't want because you just used your firearm in a justified defensive manner in a good way. But you'll pay your attorney's mortgage for a couple months.
Yeah, don't do that. I mean, keep your money. I think that's a good thing. So I really do. I have plenty of work. So does any other lawyer I know. So yeah.
You heard the lawyer say it. Yep. It's reasonable. Expect it if you get in a defensive encounter. Yep. Tim, sure appreciate the knowledge.
Always my pleasure, buddy. Thank you.